Hello again, everybody. Next up, we've got the Web Platform Podcast's very own Danny Blue with his talk, Apps with Custom Elements and RxJS. So, straight over to you, Danny.
Thank you very much, Leon, and thank you everybody that's showing an interest in. Those aren't my slides, but everybody that's showing an interest in web components. First day seems like it went great, and second day seems like it's also going great. So like Leon said, what I want to talk about specifically is custom elements, of course, because this is web component conference, but also how you can use RxJS to help you stitch together custom elements into applications. So I had a tough time coming up with a catchy title. I'm really bad at it, but all I can say is that I hope you all like diagrams. And DEE_BLOO is my Twitter handle. If you guys have if anybody has any questions or anything after everything is over and they want to get in touch. All right. So first off, let's talk about what is RxJS. So this is the wonderfully riveting definition given from their website. RxJS is a library for composing asynchronous and event-based programs by using observable sequences. It provides one core type, the observable, satellite types, observers, schedulers, and subjects, and operators inspired by array extras, map, filter, reduce, etc., to allow handling asynchronous events as collections. That is a bit verbose and may not give the really easy definition that one might be looking for. But there's a quote directly under that on the website, which I like a lot, that says, think of RxJS as Lodash for events. And I think that's pretty good. And so now it's already code time. So what I want to do is I want to give a short example of what observables are, kind of what they look like, and what it means by Lodash for events. So for my examples, I'm going to be using TypeScript, but the same everything is almost exactly the same if you're using vanilla JavaScript. So what we're going to do first is we're going to import an observable from RxJS. Sorry, everybody. I will zoom. One second. Let me get everything set up the way that it needs to be. Okay. Leon said, let me zoom in a little bit. Leon, is that better? Awesome. Thank you very much, Leon. Okay, cool. I was missing a from. Hooray, first live coding mistake. Okay, so what we want to do, so I've imported just the base observable from RxJS, and now I'm going to create an observable stream. So let's just call it foo. Observable from, not from, create, which accepts a function for your observable. So now in this callback function for create, the argument that gets passed in is something that we call an observer. So that would be the thing that is actually subscribing to our observable. So inside of here we can call observer.next, which means that this is how we are pushing our code, pushing values to our observable. And then from there, foo.subscribe. And in this case, we're just going to alert those the results that come back from that. All right. Let's run this real quick so you can see that it works. Nothing really exciting yet. It's hard to see what the benefit is from something like this. So let's look at here, and we automatically get back hello. That's awesome. Again, not a great example. So now let's push 2 values in this case. Push hello world. And if we go back, we're going to get 2 values, hello world. So one of the more powerful parts about Rx is the ability to use its operators. And you can think of them very much so like array extras in vanilla JavaScript. So for an example here, let's try filter. So we're just going to try foo.filter, which again takes a function, and we are only want to return it if the results equal hello. So from our stream, we only want it to work if the value, if the result coming back is hello. So again, if we run it here, we're going to get hello, no world. I'm going to give you one other quick example, and that is going to be map. So what we're saying is we're filtering. We only want to get the results back if it's hello. In this case, we're going to split and join, compiling, and now when this comes back, we get hello with all of the dashes through it. So that is a very simple example of a simple observable stream, but also how you can act on all of the the data that's flowing through the stream. And you can really think, and it's the closest I've seen to the internet actually being tubes, but you can think of it very much that way. The one other thing that I want to show, because it's going to be relevant to our example later, is the different types of observables that we're different ways we're going to create observables. So in this case, we're creating our observable and we're getting past the observer, which we can call next on. What we're going to want to use for our state management is something called a subject, and specifically a behavior subject. So in this case, we're going to remove this. Pass it string. Let's just go with any. Easier for now. And you'll see that it throws an error straight away. And that is because a behavior subject always returns an initial value. So in this case, we'll just return hello, just like that. And so now right off the bat, you see I don't have to call next on anything here, and I will get hello back, same as I wanted to. So now I change this to world and say later on I end up pushing value. And this could be, this could be way down the stream. This could be way down in our application somewhere, but we're still pushing it to the same place, and it's going to flow through all of our same information. And now we're only going to get our hello once again. Behavior subjects are what are commonly used when you're using Rx for state management, because they return an initial value. Okay, so now that we've written our first little observable, and we have the basic idea of its structure, let's take a look at our back at our slides, and we're going to look at a couple diagrams of how we're expecting state to flow through our application, and then how we can translate that state into RxJS observables. I will actually go full screen. So the first thing that we need is some sort of a bucket that's going to hold our state for whatever it is. The example we're going to do is a very simple to-do application. So this would be what holds our to-dos. And then from that state, we need to generate some sort of a view. So, and that could be anything depending on your application. But in this case, that view part is really going to be our custom element. And then we need some sort of an action that is going to update the state, which is in turn going to cause the view to update. Now, if we translate this into RxJS, what we get is really something like this. So our state is a behavior subject. Excuse me. Our view subscribes to that behavior subject, and then with that reference calls next when it needs to update all of the value, when it needs to update a value. And so now if you look at it this way, now you can have two separate views looking at the same looking at the same state, but whenever they call next or push new data into this store, all of the subscribers are going to be notified, and everybody's going to be happy that it's all happening. Now how this ties directly to our custom elements is that we are going to tie our custom element properties directly to observables. So in this case, this is another way to think about the same information. But so here we have two different stores, two different states of data. Both of them are behavior subjects, and we have one single view. So now from here, everything is the same. The view subscribes to our subject or our state and updates whenever anything happens, and it calls next to push a new value back through that store, which again triggers an update in the state. All that is wonderful, but what is cool is that now you can also swap those. You can plug into another observable stream, and without changing anything else, without having to wire up anything else, our one view is now going to behave exactly the way you would expect, plugged into a different data source. And so now, after my wonderful, wonderful diagrams, it's pretty much going to be code until the end, or until I am kicked off, until I am no longer allowed to do so. So let's dig back into this. And if you can't tell, I have my cheat sheet here in case I forget something. So let's kill this. We don't need this anymore. So what we're going to create here first is we're going to create what I like to call a manager, but it is the store. It is the state that is updated. Our manager is going to be new. Let's type it since we're using TypeScript. New behavior subject. It's just going to be an array of strings and a new behavior subject, which again is going to throw an error because it needs a specific state, and I always need to get milk and workout. Cool. So now, based on our previous example, we know that if we subscribe straight to this, we're going to get some information. We're going to get milk and workout back. So what we want to do now is we want to define how we're going to update these actions. So what I'm going to do is create another small function called action that is going to accept a manager of some sort, in this case, which would be any behavior subject and a function. And now we're going to introduce a new Rx operator called first. And what first does is that it takes the first value that's pushed to it, and then it stops listening. So it's actually a wrapper for another. So let me just show you this real quick. So in this case, I want to take the manager. I want to grab the first value that's pushed to it. So this is not the first item in this array, but it only listens once. So it will get this array back at this moment, and that would be it. First, and another one called do. So do exists explicitly for side effects, is what we're doing. So we saw map earlier, which takes a value and returns a new value. But in this case, we just want to use do to quote unquote dispatch our action. So we get our action here. So we end up getting our result back. And then what we want to do is call manager.next and pass in and run the pass in the result we got back to our function and let it update everything. And now we have now we have one action function we can use to compose that we can use to compose other actions. Excuse me. And because of this, we don't have to worry about memory leaks because we only grab the first value because that's all we want to do. And so now, to an example of creating another action, we're going to create our add to do action function. It's going to accept manager and a to do, which in our case, it's just going to be a string. Now this, we will return action, pass in the manager, and pass in our function. So also in this case, so this would be our list of to-dos. And we are going to return, in this case, a new array that is our to-dos and append our new to-do to it. So now we've used our main action function to define another action. But the one thing that you will notice is that I'm always passing in whatever the manager is. So I could feed these functions any manager that I wanted to. I could feed it anything that was a behavior subject, actually any sort of observable that return this value. But remember, behavior subject we want to use because it returns an initial value and it is both an observable and an observer that can be pushed to. Cool. So now I'm going to just copy and paste my remove to do action from here. And all this one is doing is that it is defining another action and is filtering out anything that does not belong to that certain that does not belong to that index. So quick review: our manager, which is holding our state, an action function which grabs the current value of the state and runs our function over the results and pushes that back to the manager. Our add to do action, which accepts a manager and a new to do and pushes the new value to that, appends the new to do to that list, and our remove to do action. So pretty straightforward. Nothing that a lot of you have probably not seen before or messed around with just a bit. But what we need to do now is really plug it in. And I use the term plug it in I use it on purpose because that's really what it feels like you are doing. So let me just go ahead and copy my completed custom element, which I can do with the utmost grace. Okay. So let's walk through here what we're doing with our custom element. I don't want to dig into it too much because I'm more concerned in this case about showing how observables get plugged into stuff versus exactly how a custom element is created. There are a bunch of great resources and a bunch of talks here exactly about web components and custom elements, but I'm only concerned with the custom elements part. So I create my new to do element, and I am defining a property, which in this case is to dos, which is not going to accept. So I will actually, I will type this. So instead of just passing in a list of to dos, this is going to be a behavior subject. And while we're doing it, we'll keep it nice and type safe. Cool. Yeah. So there are a lot of other patterns that many have probably seen where you can have to trigger a render inside of a custom element. You define a getter and a setter and use that to trigger it. In this case, we are just going to again plug in an observable stream to this list of to dos. This right here is just my is just creating my UL element that will keep everything. After the component's been connected, I'm going to append the list, and then I'm going to directly subscribe to this list of to-dos. And then I'm just going to call my update list function, which method, which if you look down here is just very naively creates a new list whenever something else is pushed to it. So this is the boring stuff. This is the interesting stuff. And then I'm going to have a remove to do method, which calls the remove to do action, passing in its current set of observables, and this ID in this case is the index. You'll notice here that I've subscribed to this action. Observables don't do anything if you do not subscribe to them in this case. So if we look back up at our remove to do action, if I just called remove to do action, nothing would happen. You have to call subscribe at the end. Even if you don't do anything with it, you still have to call it. There are other ways you can get around it there are other patterns you can use. For example, subscribing inside of here, but I like keeping it this way because then I have the ability to, it's like, okay, well, I want to do something whenever a to-do is successfully added. Because another thing to remember in this case is that while everything here is async. So while right now we're just updating this, this could be updating on the server, it could be updating it in a web worker, it could be doing a bunch of other things. And this way you don't have to change how you're interacting with stuff to make it work. As a brief overview. Now let's actually attach this. So I'm going to copy the rest of my code. Down to here. And so I have a very simple form that is just going to add a to-do whenever something is added. And let's comment out these parts for right now. And so now I'm creating a new instance of my to-do list element. And I am plugging in the manager. So now this is the scary part because I haven't gone back to the browser in a minute, and we're about to hit refresh and really, really hope that some stuff shows up. I've done it. I have done it. Okay. But yeah, so right now we're getting our get milk and our workout items from that list. And if I click the little X, they're going to go away. So far, so good. Now let's see if let's also zoom on this. Hello to the conference. Didn't know buttons did that when you zoomed in on them. That's interesting. And I can just type in a bunch of other gibberish here and then click to remove them. All right, awesome. So now again, where this starts to get interesting is now I want to create another instance of my to-do list, and I want to plug in the exact same manager. So let's append this here. Now I'm going to get two lists. And now if I click to remove, things are removed. If I add stuff is added to both. And all of it is done because all of the functionality and all the behavior is wrapped up in my component, and I just give it the data stream that it needs to act on. So while it almost might seem like it's updating its own state, it's really not. The data is still flows one way. When you call next, it pushes new value into the behavior subject, which updates all of its subscribers. So you still get that loop that was shown in, let me go back to the diagram real quick. You still get this loop, even though it's plugged into, even though something gets plugged into multiple observable streams. So now the other cool thing about this is, well, okay, so now I have two lists, but now I have this one, and I just want to plug in another manager. So let's do that as well. So now this is going to be manager 2. And this one's only going to have one thing in it, which is take questions. Now, if I go back to the example, and plug it in. Let's plug it in. Always check if it's plugged in. Cool. And so again, now this one is only tied to the one manager, so everything only gets updated there. But I am a big fan of the idea of being able to quote unquote plug observable streams into different behavior-driven custom elements, or really views. You can do this with anything, but I think custom elements are a really good use case for this. And because everything is observables, you can you have access to all of the observable operators that are available. If you need to debounce something inside of a specific component, it can be done without affecting anything else. And you don't have to worry about your state getting out of sorts. Everything tries to stay put, and everything tries to stay in sync the way that you would think that it would. Which I find is a very powerful way of treating observables. I did get to start a little bit early, so I have one other thing that I want to show you for interacting using observables with observables, and that's also, we've been focusing on inputs here, but we can also focus specifically on outputs. So there was a good talk yesterday about props in for data and events out using native custom events. But if you are doing everything with observables, you can treat them as your outputs as well. So in this case, we have to-dos that are to-dos are input, and that is an observable stream. But we could also say something like, we could also create a property called changed or something like that we want to update anytime anything happens. Because we want to be able to notify the outside world in a separate stream away from our normal list. So what we're going to grab here is, instead of a behavior subject, normal subject, and we make this choice in this case because we don't want to dispatch something immediately. We only want to dispatch it when something happens. So in this case, we're going to create new behavior subject. Not behavior subject. I just said we weren't going to do that. New subject, just like this. So now, if we look down in our code where we're creating our button and binding our listener, so right now we're saying on click to remove it, which does all of its stuff. But say we also wanted to, we want to call this not changed. Next. We're not going to pass it a value. We could if we want to, but we just want to notify. It's like, hey, something is now different. So now if we go to our to-do list, I call it changed. Remembering property names. Yeah, I did. Naming property names is hard. Changed. So now I'm subscribing for whenever that event comes in. And again, if I hit refresh, I do this, I'm going to get that event fired. So you definitely don't have to do it this way. And I don't think I would recommend publishing web components with a dependency like Rx, just because it's not something that everybody's going to be comfortable or familiar with. But I think when you are building applications with components, that Rx does provide a really good way of helping to manage your data in the state that is flowing through your application. You can also use Rx without, as I say, plugging it straight into the component, because especially for events, there are a bunch of native observable types that you can use. So if you want to get like a lot of debounce and things like that, you can use you can create observables from events, and it looks just like this. So I'll actually, yeah, this works. It's like that, and then you can pass in something like that, and then the name of the property, and that's going to complain because it's my list one. Something like that, and then you can subscribe that way as well. So this is a way that you can do something like this without having to tightly integrate observables with your custom elements. Again, I think that this is a really fascinating way of doing it. It's something that I'm playing around with right now. At work, we do use Rx to help to manage the state for our application, and I'm becoming really interested in in general, managing state of the state of custom elements actually being observables. I feel like it gives you a lot of flexibility as long as you are willing to buy in to the to the observable pattern, and you're buying into RxJS as a way that you want to handle it. Plug into any stream. And thank you guys very, very much. This is all, that's all I had prepared to show. I want to thank everybody that is listening for watching, for checking everything out. Thank you very much for attending the conference. And since we have a little bit of time, if anybody has any questions that they wanted to put into the chat, I am more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, I think somebody just put something in the chat there, which is what I was going to say. I think this is going to be one of those talks that people go back to time and time again to go over the code and really try. Really, really brilliant concepts. I really like RxJS, although I've not had as much time as I'd like to spend and play around with it. So really good to see those kind of concepts. I actually had a question, but you answered it right at the very end, which was about dependencies and whether you'd use that in more of a, if you're kind of got control over all the components, not necessarily publishing a component with the dependency on RxJS. So you answered that perfectly before you even got a chance to ask.
No, awesome. And I do have the code available on GitHub. I'll make sure that it's public for this. And Leon, are we sharing the slides out?
Yeah, we can do. Yeah, if you can send them over, we can tweet them out, etc., so everybody can see them. So, yep. Thank you very much, Danny. That was awesome.
Yeah, no problem. Again, thanks everybody for paying attention. I will make sure that the slides are shared. I'll make sure there's a link there. I did see a question. Since you're doing the Redux pattern, can you plug this into the Redux dev tools? That I do not know for sure. So it might be closer to. It's technically an Angular project, but the NGRX, but it's a Redux pattern, and it's really just doing some Angular configuration for you on the front end of stuff. But you don't have to use it that way. It's just using a more specific, I guess, a more traditional Redux pattern for doing that. I know they have their own dev tools, and since that is using observables, I think you may be able to, if you structure your actions correctly, I think you could plug it into those. I don't know about the Redux specific dev tools though.
Cool. Thank you very much. And yeah, we'll share out the code and everything, and the slides or all those other kind of things as well. So excellent.
I'll do that as soon as I get off of here.
Cheers. Thank you. And for everybody else, we'll be moving over to the next session shortly. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.